Lumber Tycoon 2 is home to numerous items, including structures, conveyors, and logical components. However, not all items are created equally, with some being far more useless than others. So in this video, I'm going to be going over what I believe are the 6 most useless items in Lumber Tycoon 2, and explaining why I believe they deserve that title. Now, just to preface the video, I am not including things that are obviously meant to be useless, including Christmas and Halloween items. These items are obviously just meant to be fun little trinkets and shouldn't really be judged alongside other items that have actual intended use cases. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's just hop right into it. Now, to start off, I have an item that I bet none of you have actually used for its intended purpose, that being the conveyor supports. Now, don't get me wrong, conveyor supports can be very useful when placing conveyors down, especially tilted conveyors, but once you realize that you can just place blueprint instead of actually buying the supports, your life becomes a lot easier. And really, the only valid use case of conveyor supports is for decoration, especially if you do have some sort of big wood yard and would like to decorate your conveyors by having them actually connected to the ground or ceiling. However, for its intended use of making it easier to place conveyors on top of each other, it really doesn't do a great job. And that's in part because of how much effort it takes to actually buy enough conveyor supports to make them actually worthwhile. See, while conveyor supports don't necessarily cost a lot of money, with the normal ones only costing 12 and the turn ones costing 20, they do take up a lot of space and time to buy. And so it is often easier just to place down a floor or a smooth wall and then place your conveyors on top of that, rather than going through all of the effort of buying the supports, placing them on your base, and then buying enough of them to actually reach where your conveyor is wanting to go. So yeah, conveyor supports don't really have a ton of use cases. Another useless item in Lumber Tycoon 2, and this one might be controversial, is the fair sawmill. Now, the fair sawmill is the second sawmill in progression after the shabby sawmill, costing over 10 times the price. However, for this price increase, I do not think it's worth it at all, as you are only gaining 0.2 studs more clearance for a maximum log width. And this increase from 1.4 studs on the shabby sawmill to 1.6 studs on the fair sawmill really allows you to fit no new tree type into the sawmill. And that's because you can fit basically every tree that goes into the fair sawmill into the shabby sawmill as well, including oak, birch, and even cherry. So you are really gaining nothing at all when you buy the fair sawmill, aside from having it look a little more professional. Now, one reason why I am labeling the shabby sawmill as a controversial pick for a useless item is because there is a noticeable increase in the maximum cross plank section between the fair sawmill and the shabby. And that's because the fair sawmill can actually output planks in size of up to 2.4 by 1.6 units. And this is a pretty big increase over the shabby sawmill, which can only output planks of 1.8 by 1.2 units. Now, while this output is a pretty big jump, I honestly don't think it's worth anything at all. It's definitely not worth 10 times the price of the shabby sawmill, and that's because you really don't need larger planks at this point in the game. I mean, at this point, you're really just trying to get a better car, a better axe. You're not really looking to build anything substantial out of wood. And even if you were trying to build something out of wood, there's a high chance that you either have the powers to build with ease, or the game pass that allows you to fill blueprints with 1 stud anyways. And that renders the cross-section increase as basically useless, making the whole sawmill a pretty useless item. The next item, which I am labeling as useless, is the plain axe, and by extension, the steel axe too. And the reason I'm labeling these axes as useless is because for their price point, it's really just not worth buying them at all. And the reason I recommend skipping over these 2 axes entirely is because of how easy it is to earn money when you first start out the game. Now, while it is true that it is a lot cheaper to just buy the plain axe or the steel axe, you are just going to be wasting that money later down the line, because it's kind of pointless to chop down 1 or 2 oak trees just to buy an axe to chop down maybe 1 or 2 more before getting the hardened axe. It just doesn't really make sense. And that's why my advice is always just going to be skipping directly from the basic hatchet to the hardened axe. Lumber Tycoon 2 has a ton of blueprints, although I think there is one blueprint in particular, or one type of blueprint, that is very, very useless. And those blueprints are the fence corners, and there are two fence corners. There's the standard fence corner, and there's the short fence corner. And the reason why these blueprints are so useless is because hardly anyone even builds with fences anymore, and those who do build with fences don't even use the corners half the time. And that's also because fence corners do a really hard job of lining up with the pattern of the fence, so unless you plan it all out in advance, you are not going to have a fence that looks smooth. And honestly, I would call fences as a whole very useless, except fences can actually be used in some other niche cases, especially when building, but fence corners just really can't be. And ultimately, I think the issue with fence corners is that they were designed to fit a very specific use case that really isn't used at all in today's era. Like, let's be real here, I don't think I've ever seen someone actually building a fence around their base, and like I said before, the people who do build a fence around their base often just use posts, or smooth walls, or something else to mark the corners. Now, does this mean that Defaultio should remove fence corners from the game? No, they are still pretty useful if you are actually building with fences, but it's just that so few people actually do that I believe it's just a very useless item. Alright, our next item is the wall light, and the wall light is a very sad case of a useless item, because this item should actually be useful, it just is not. And that's because the wall light actually emits so little light that you can barely even tell that it's on. And this kinda sucks because the wall light as a concept is so nice. I would love to have major floodlights just going over the front of my base, but I just can't because the wall light simply does not provide enough light for it. And Defaultio has tried to fix the wall light by increasing its brightness, but no matter what he does, it just doesn't really make the wall light actually shine. Anyways, the wall light, aside from not really working as a light, is still somewhat useful in decoration because it is a nice cylindrical shape, and I have seen it used in a lot of very intriguing builds. However, for its intended purpose of being an item that emits light in the direction that you place it down, yeah, it's pretty easy to say that this one is quite useless. And finally, we arrive at what I believe to be the most useless item in Lumber Tycoon 2, that being the wood sweeper. Now, there are a variety of issues with the wood sweeper, such as it being misaligned from other conveyors and being incredibly buggy, but even when thinking of the wood sweeper as a fully functional model, it still just does not do its job very well. And that's because when you're moving wood on a 90-degree angle, it is much better to just use a turn conveyor, as it gets the job done a lot faster. And the wood sweeper does this very weird thing where it actually stops the oncoming wood from entering the conveyor and then sweeps off all wood that is on the conveyor itself. And what this actually does is prevents the wood from flowing seamlessly from point A to point B, often resulting in very clumpy sections of wood where you have a ton of wood for a second and then none, and then a lot and then none again. And the worst part about the wood sweeper is how flawed it really is fundamentally. Now, don't get me wrong, the idea of a wood sweeper is really awesome, and I think the wood sweeper would actually work if it was just made a little bit better, but in its current state, the only reason why it would be used is if you were trying to transport very small blocks of wood from point A to point B around a 90-degree turn, and for some reason you don't want to use the tight turn conveyor, even though it is 5 times cheaper. So yeah, I really don't see the wood sweeper being used at all these days, and unfortunately, that's for a good reason. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video. This one was a little different than my usual style, so I hope that you guys enjoyed it. And let me know down in the comments if you agree with my list, or if you think that some of the items I talked about today are actually more or less useful than I described them to be. Anyways, this is going to be it for me, so goodbye.